So welcome back for session 2. Some of these sessions, trying to have them built on one another. Islam for 13th century has been the culture center. You probably, if you read some of the books that I suggested, you probably would see that Arabic at one point was the language of arts and sciences. So if you wanted to get ahead or get an advance or get a job in the Muslim empire, Arabic was the language to learn. Islam affected some cultures and some cultures affected Islam. I'm going to attempt in 45 minutes. Again, this is a 16-week course to go from the birth of the Prophet to maybe current era, pinpointing some cultural norms and pinpointing some changes in laws and some changes in government that by the end of all these slides, you're going to say, what? You know, this is really confusing. I'm really lost. Hopefully I won't lose you. But the point is, I'm trying to make is, it's not that simple. It's not that simple when we talk about Islam and we say, when we talk in general terms that, you know, this is what Islam teaches. This is, this is what Muslim practice because, you know, the person who perpetrated this act is a Muslim and thus this is what Islam teaches. And the simple fact is there are many practices throughout the world. We're going to go through, they put me a border here, right? So I should not move from any side of this border. Is that what it is? Come on, I'm used to being a refugee now. So in my classes at Oklahoma City University, I started the class last week and then said, oh, we move you to another class. I hope you don't mind. I said, oh, no, I'm used to being a refugee, so I could be confined to lines. We're going to go from the life of Muhammad. This was quickly, and I'm just going to go back and forth for us to understand. The dynasties, the Umayyad dynasties from 661 to 750, the Abbasides, the three feuding Islamic state, the Ottoman Empire, colonialism, and I'm going to give you a couple of case studies, in particular American Muslim and the culture in American Muslims, and the culture in the Levant, right? Because this is now the most, the area that is mostly with an atmosphere and a culture of hate and terror. For the most part, Islam is not monolithic. I think somebody asked me that, and we should understand. This will make us understand and realize that just like Christianity, just like Judaism, Islam is not monolithic. There's some Muslims do share some common beliefs, but after the death of Prophet Muhammad, the spread beyond Arabia into different countries, different cultures, ranging from Bosnia, that's in Europe, to China, to Yemen, to Zanzibar, it became interpreted in many diverse ways. And it was designed that way, or Muslims believe that it was designed that way, that Islamic culture and Islamic civilization is to be taken to, within 100 years, the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire was overtaken by Islam, and the more Islam went from a culture to culture, it affected culture, but it also affected by culture. This is a good book for Carl Ernest. He said, religion never exists in a vacuum. It always interwoven with multiple standards, strands of culture and history that link it to a particular location. The rhetoric of a religion, the rhetoric of religion must be put into context so that we know both the objectives and the opponent of particular spokespeople. You know, when we look at the Quran, say the Quran, it took me 10 years to study the Quran, and I don't know it. I have a PhD in Sharia law. I still not even touching the surface. The Quran is so complex, and the commands of the Quran is so complex. We study an entire year the reason why a certain verse was revealed. Was that verse particular to a certain culture? Was that verse particular to a certain area? Was that verse addressing a certain something that could be interpreted as general and so on? There's no such a thing as pure Islam. Farish Noor say, Islam or historic Islam that is outside the process of historical development. The actual lived experience of Islam has always been culturally and historically specific, and it bounds by immediate circumstances of its location, its time and space. If we were to take a snapshot of Islam as it lived today, it would reveal a diversity of lived experiences which are all different, yet existent simultaneously. He wrote a book, New Voices for Islam, and of course, Edward Said, university professor of English, Columbia University, he say, the problem facing anyone attempting to say anything intelligible, useful, or accurate about Islam, what he's really, that some people kind of frown on this, that one should therefore begin by speaking of Islams rather than Islam. And I tell you, some Muslims, when you say there's many Islams, some Muslims are going to frown upon that statement because, how can you say there's more than one Islam? The idea here, what Dr. Edward Said is trying to say, is there is a tremendous amount of diversity within Islam itself. Just like there's a tremendous amount of diversity within our culture in the United States, tremendous amount of diversity in interpreting the law, so was Islam. So here's the life of Muhammad in 3 minutes or less, 570 to 632. The pre-Arabia, Islamic Arabia, a culture that is filled with idols, people worshiping idols, not in Mecca today, biblically Quran. People lived there. There was a trace of Christianity, a trace of Judaism in Mecca. Mecca was a tribal society. The Meccan people used to be very tribal. And tribal were at war with one another, and thus they used to fight one another all the time. So you probably heard this term, honor killing. Anybody heard that term? Right. So pre-Arabia was practicing what we called honor killing. When people actually, when the two tribes would come together and they fight with one another, guess what happened for the losers, right? The women from the other tribes become sex slaves to the other tribes. So a father would come up and say, okay, I don't want to go through this dishonoring my family name, dishonoring my clan name, and that's a big thing. Clan name in a tribal society is a big thing. You all heard the name Bin Laden, right? It's not a last name. There are 1.2 million Bin Ladens. They drop their last names and they adopt the tribe name. Yeah, that's how strong it is. So Arabs used to do something that's going to sound gruesome, really bizarre. They will dig the ground and bury their infant daughter alive. So the Quran comes and say, what fault did this young girl do to deserve this? Outlawed this bizarre practice. So Muhammad comes with this message. He received revelation around 610, start speaking public outreach, and his message was not only worship one God. Now you are one people, bound by faith rather than by tribal association. Not, in a society where family name and tribal name means everything. Muhammad comes with a strong social justice message, which it didn't psych some people out, right? So Muhammad was an orphan. He lost his father at an early age. He married his wife, as we said early on. She was a very wealthy widow. She gave all her money to the Prophet, and he started to propagate the faith. Honor killing still being practiced. I know. It's not Islamic. It's very culture. as we move forward here, I'm going to go back and forth just to give you some names that used to exist, or some terms that used to exist prior to Islam. The wife of Prophet 619, it made Muhammad, who actually stayed single for a while, look inward. His uncle also died at the same week. 622, migration. The Muslims migrated from Mecca to Medina, from Paran to Atima. Now, here's something fascinating. If anybody studies the Quran culture changes from Mecca to Medina. So in Mecca, where Muslims were being oppressed and so on and so forth, the language of the Quran was very spiritual. Be patient. Think of the hereafter. Think of heaven. Think of the hereafter in terms of you have to be a person of extreme patience. You have to be consistent and so on and so forth. But Muhammad migrated to Medina 622. What is known as the Medinite verses completely changes. Now, Muhammad is the head of state. We're going to be talking about that in the next lecture. So Muhammad became a head of state. Not only did he become a head of state, the revelation started to talk about organizing the society, coming together, penal law. What happened if somebody Muhammad will make the first Medina, what is known as Medina Constitution, the first document. Are you ready for this? The first secular document ever written as a constitution. There's a couple of books written about the Medina Constitution, and basically the constitution say an attack on any culture or on any tribe in Medina is an attack on all. In Medina, there were Muslims, there were Christian, there were Jews, there were people of no faith whatsoever. And they came together under this constitution. Of course, there was battles, 624, 625, 627, Battle of the Trench. The Quran is coming with verses encouraging and verses of encouragement, and also verses that actually telling the Prophet to forgive. 628 verses start talking about peace, and all of a sudden, the people who were odd with the Prophet came, and the first peace treaty was known as Al-Hudaybiyah. Al-Hudaybiyah is southeast of Saudi Arabia, a place, and Muhammad would sign the first peace treaty. He's recognized as a leader, and the first peace treaty was broken. 629, Muhammad goes back to Mecca. Goes back to Mecca after he's been expelled. Him and his followers been expelled for a long time. And under tribal laws, there's little pity for the people who lose under tribal laws. However, Muhammad carried no retaliation whatsoever. He embraced all the people who actually fought him. He embraced all the tribes who actually formed an alliance against him. And a message of forgiveness and reconciliation and peace started to emerge. Muhammad died, went back to Medina, did not stay there, and he died in year 632. The death of Muhammad now made it clear that there's a Khalifa. I put C-A-L-I-P-H-A. You probably also could be spelled C-L-I-P. Our Khalifa, there's one thing we're trying to work on with Dr. Esposito and Dr. Charles Kimball at the University of Oklahoma is to standardize those terms. Because for a student of knowledge, sometimes you have Mecca, M-E-C-C-A. Then Mecca, M-E-K-K-A-H. Or what I always say, don't make a big deal out of it. Get it? Don't make a big deal out of it. But for the most part, we have not had standards. So it's sometimes spelled Medinine in one book, and Medinite in another book, or the Arabic word Medani, an Arabic word. So we're trying to standardize that. That's coming up probably in a couple of years if we get always finish these research. Those research takes a long time. OMG. Oh, sorry. OMA. Should know that by now. OMA. Oh, my Allah. For the most part, Muhammad died 632, and there's a turmoil. And the caliphate now, what is known as the caliphate, is from 632 to 1259. Three major periods. The rightly guided caliphate from 632 to 661. And the capital was Medina. So Islam started where the Islam, you know, I say historically started, because theologically when we say Islam started in Mecca in the year 6, in the year when the Prophet was there, theologically for Muslims that's not when Islam started. For Muslims, Islam started with Adam, passing through Enoch and passing through Noah. So, but historically, 632 to 6 is the Medina and Saudi Arabia. Then it moved to another dynasty known as the Umayyad dynasty, 661 to 750, and the capital moved to Syria. Then the Abbasid Empire, the capital went to Baghdad, Iraq. Now, all these are Arab capitals. Eventually, Islam moved to Egypt, and from Egypt it was divided into three different continents, from India, Pakistan to what is known today as Iran, and then eventually was taken by what is known today as Turkey, by the Ottoman Empire. So Islam have gone from civilization to civilization, from culture to culture, from place to place. And it's really fascinating when you read the rulings on things and you read the laws and how Islam affected culture and how culture affected Islam. The caliphates, 4 of them, very known to Muslim. This is the ideal path that often looked at as a template for legislation. This is what we call the root of Sunni Islam. Okay, there are 2 groups you probably already know. There is the Sunni Islam and the Shia Islam. We don't call these denominations, by the way, but we call these school of thought or movement. The 2 major themes we always hear on the news: the Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurds. Anybody heard those words from Iraq? The Kurds is not a denomination or is not a school of thought. The Kurd is an ethnicity, right? So everybody always asks me, said, can you tell me the difference between the Sunni and the Shia and the Kurds? Well, the Kurds are actually predominantly Sunni. 88% up to 90% of the Muslims will identify themselves as Sunni Muslims. And only 10%, 12% will identify themselves as Shia Muslim. I told you I'm going to talk quite a bit about my perspective, because my grandmother is Shia, right? My grandmother is Shia, and my grandfather is Sunni. We never knew anything is different whatsoever. You know, we grew up in a very loving home. You know, people always ask me, are you Sunni or are you Shia? I say, I'm sushi, you know. But I said, we'll find out that these kind of differences don't exist in the West, because we're a minute minority. We're less than 1% of the world population, right? Just like you ask any Christian in the Middle East, are you Baptist or Methodist or Episcopal? And he said, I think I follow, the Apostle Paul. My family comes from. So it's not a thing there. What I want you to know about this area here, ready? Abu Bakr was only stayed for, when the Prophet died, there was no system, neither divine system nor a prophetic system left for who's going to succeed. So Abu Bakr was the son-in-law, the father-in-law of the Prophet, and Abu Bakr was his right hand. So there was a semi-democratic process started. Everybody said, well, the Prophet likes you, all in favor for you to be the leader, say aye. So everybody said aye, and he was the leader. Right? He died shortly after that. Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr, before he died, he named this person to be his Khalifa. Khalifa means the successor. 634 to 644, he was awesome at promoting justice. He was awesome at a lot of things. He was awesome at actually bringing an election committee together, but he was proven really bad at preventing assassination, because he was killed while praying, stabbed 14 times. The narration that an overzealous Zoroastrian person killed Omar. Here, C and D, when things go bad just a little bit, Uthman ibn Affan becomes the Khalifa. Uthman belongs to a different clan. His clan fought the Prophet during the time where the Prophet needed them. So there was always that feeling, that clan feeling there. But nevertheless, here, right here, 632, 634, there are the group of people who believed that since God chose the Prophet Muhammad to become a prophet, then the leadership ought to stay in his family. Later on, this becomes problematic at this area here because Ali bin Abi Talib is part of the family of the Prophet, and some people felt that he was passed 3 times before he actually became a Khalifa. 656 to 661, Uthman ibn Affan is killed, assassinated on the hands of the Muslims. Now that's a group, we call it Al-Khawarij in Arabic, or Kharijites, as we spell that. Kharijites are those people who literally interpret things. This is the roots of this group that still exists to these days. Those people who take the scripture literally, look at it from the culture of, if you're not with us, you're against us. Black and white. As a matter of fact, the latest edition of ISIS magazine saying their title, Destroying the Gray Area, right? And ISIS named few people on the list as their hit list. A lot of these people on their hit list are U.S. imams who talk interfaith and speak of peace and try to bring people together. Nevertheless, that group that assassinated Uthman ibn Affan, this Khalifa, tried to install this man as a Khalifa, which it kind of looked bad, right? You just assassinated the leader before me, and you want me to be the leader. Nevertheless, he took the leadership. 661, there was the first civil war. The first civil war that inspired the Shiite of Ali, or the party of Ali, people who actually, I don't want to go through all the details, but even the grandchildren of the Prophet were butchered on the hand of other Muslims. But this original turmoil is what initially started the Sunni Shia divide, so to speak. Ali would move actually to what is known today as Iraq. So the vast majority of Shias are in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. This is what we call the Shia crescent in that particular area. The Umayyad came after that. So Ali and the rightly guided Caliphate are no more. The Umayyad now, by the way, let me go back here. The head of state, all those people were head of states, political leader, and they were also religious leaders. So there was no separation between state and religion at this time. There was no separation between state and religion during the time of the Prophet. The Prophet would allow everybody, the Christian tribes, the Jewish tribes, the people who worship idols, to do whatever they want, to come up. So the Christians will have their own courts, the Jews will have their own courts, and that was kind of like a federation. The Prophet and the state that was in existence at that time would validate what the Christian courts would say or what the Jewish court would say. After the death of the Prophet, another dynasty came, the Umayyad dynasty, and they changed. It became an anarchy. There was a separation, or an attempt of separation, between state and religion. Not really a huge separation, but an attempt. You would see under Muhammad 622 to 632, this is the piece of land that was conquered under the 4 Caliphs, 632 and 661. They moved all the way to Iraq, although the capital stayed in Medina, but they moved to Iraq all the way to Iran. This is the Zoroastrian now. This is the Sasanian Empire and the Roman Empire on this side. They will not go upward towards Constantinople and that area until the Ottoman Empire. But can you imagine, within 100 years, those people who were tribal have a state or have a piece of property that it takes a huge, I mean, it's going to grow even more. Territory added by the Umayyad, 661 to 750, you would see all this territory. Look where they're at. Spain. They went all the way to Spain. This is Europe. As a matter of fact, if you read the history of Cordoba and the history of Spain, you would see that there is a civilization here where the rest of Europe here was in darkness. Spain have gardens. Spain have running water. Spain, people who, a Christian nun who went from this part of Europe to Spain wrote a massive amount of poetry on how beautiful Andalusia, which is a part of Spain, is, and she actually was describing the envy of Europe of this Islamic civilization. They had running water, they had lighted streets, they have flowers, they have gardens. Here, where the people actually lived the life of sciences. 2 capitals, right? One all the way in Spain here, and one fixing to be moving here to Iraq, to Baghdad. Baghdad and Spain were 2 civilizations. One moved this way, and one moved upward the other way. Now, imagine the Muslims encountering different civilization and different places. You go to Iran, where people mostly are Zoroastrians. You go to places like a move to the India, where people were of Hindu background and so on. Like I was telling somebody said, Muslims don't have like theology, that the idea of processed theology. The Prophet thought there's only one God. That's one God. That's it. But when Islam started coming into different civilization and different places, they encountered things that they had to answer. How does God look like? Does God have hands? Does God, other people have, the triology in Hinduism. So Muslim scholar started to write literature that is very similar to Christian theology and Christian processed theology. Some of these places, in particular in Afghanistan, which is to this day still is very, very, very tribal, and is based on tribal rule, Islam would move in, and whatever culturally is accepted to Islam, whatever is lawful accepted to Islam, Islam will take it. Whatever is not accepted to Islam, Islam will block it. But what we're saying nowadays, such as the example I gave about honor killings and so on, is going back to these practices that some of those people used to practice. Give you an example. The Syria, when Islam moved into Syria, the Syrian society was a metropolitan area. Marriages in Arabia, for instance, in Mecca, the Islamic law has a spousal gift that has to be given. So when somebody is getting married, according to Islamic law, a man has to give his wife a gift, a spousal gift. The spousal gift that's given from a man to his wife is hers, and it's hers to keep. And according to Islamic laws, have to be given prior to the wedding. Prior to the actual wedding. And moving to Syria, where women actually were working, the women were earning their own money. Women were, elite class in society, and so on and so forth. And then you would look at it, and you would see that the ruling on the spousal gift to a wife has been diminished or taken completely all out. Another example I would give you on how the idea of this civilization that moved in, we have more. The Caliphate, politically and militarily and judicially, they control everything. The community was based on brotherhood of faith rather than tribal clan. They're established in many cities: Basra, Cairo, Kairouan, North Africa. Many universities that were established in Timbuktu. State income came from tithing, land tax, poll taxes, war spoil, society classes. In this particular era under the Umayyad, the elite were the Arabs. And that's very problematic because Islam talks about social justice and eliminate any kind of class within society. Second would be Muslims of non-Arab origin. It was an Arab empire that actually Arabized all sciences. That's why when we look at this particular dynasty, it was very short-lived, 661 to 750. A lot of corruption. Now you have the state is controlling making the decision, and you have a growth of what we know as the ulama, the scholar of Islam started to compete with the government. The government will make a decision that's not based on Islamic law. The scholar will come back and say, this is not what Islam teaches. So there was a lot of anti-Umayyad sentiment, and then started being people who are not happy are non-Arab Muslims. Islam teaches equality, Islam teaches and so on and so forth, and you're not treating us right. The Kharijites, again, those people who actually assassinated the first two Calipha, and the Shia also were at odd with the empire. The Arabs in Mecca and Medina and Iraq, three different now, also detesting the Syrian privilege. Pious Muslim were looking at some other people who have luxury lifestyle contrary to teaching of Islam. Before you know it, 667, 750, the Umayyad Empire was fallen. And it was, again, I don't want to go through all the details because that would be that's another 15-week course. The conquest, you see the Umayyad 661. Again, look at this massive piece of land. By the way, during the time of the Prophet, social justice was so important that 7th century Arabia, slavery was outlawed. 7th century Arabia, not only slavery was outlawed, when the Prophet went back to Mecca, black slaves were not even allowed to touch the shrine, this Abrahamic house that we see always all the time. The Prophet ordered a black slave by the name of Bilal to go on top of the top of the shrine and proclaim the call for prayers. And that resonated throughout Africa, resonated throughout most of the African nation. Indo-Umayyad 7th opposition united against them. They're fallen. By 750, the only thing Umayyad had is part of Spain. The capital moved to Baghdad, and the Abbasid era started. This is what, when you look at the Abbasid era, the Abbasid went even further, all the way to Delhi, all the way through India, Arabia, Medina, all the way. The only part that was still with the Umayyad Empire was Spain. Here is the Abbasid map of the Abbasid of the entire Muslim empire. This is bigger than Rome. It took to go from one side of this empire to the other side of this empire was huge. In the heart of it is Baghdad, and in the heart of it is the capital of the Umayyad Empire was Baghdad. If any person, it's the fascinating thing about Baghdad was a place called Baytul Hikmah, which is the house of wisdom. In the house of wisdom, people actually competed for jobs, just like any bureaucrats nowadays will compete for jobs. So because of this massive amount of empire and the diversity in cultures people were forced to come together in Iraq, in Baghdad, and put their intellectual knowledge together. So people from diverse background, Muslim, Christian, Jews, Hindus, they would come together, and because the empire was so huge, and the ancient work of the Greeks were translated into Arabic, then it was given as a present to the West. It is really fascinating to see the amount of work that came out of Baghdad. Out of this house of wisdom, what's also fascinating is there were many jobs were created. In particular, scribes. Most of the scribes, there was no. You have kinkos here in. There was no kinkos, so most of the scribes were women. The house of wisdom of Baghdad, to this day, there are volumes of books written about it. Any new idea in the whole world either went through Baghdad, right, or was created in Baghdad. When right on the other side, with two opposing now dynasty, the Umayyads are here, banging at each other right here. The Umayyad right here on this side also had a civilization of its own, but it's with a very Western twist, because they're in the Western Hemisphere, where scholars from Baghdad have a tremendous amount of knowledge. Here's a word that is Arabic, right? Check, not checkmate, right? Anybody writes a check? It's an Arabic word. In order to create this is a huge kingdom, and you can't be taking $1,000 from one part of the kingdom to the other part of the kingdom. So the financial institution created, and the word sak in Arabic means check, and you could write actually a check from one side of the kingdom, and it'd be honored on the other side. Literature and philosophy, algebra and geometry, science and medicine, arts and architecture was flourished. Al-Razi from 865 to 925, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, by the way, is Arabic for Avicenna, 980, 1038. Al-Ghazali, which many people in now 20th century would still look at his writing. Islamic philosophy was a product of Greek and Islamic soil. The works of the ancients was translated and given as a gift to the West. What I'm trying to say is the Western Renaissance had its roots in Baghdad. Any science that came to Baghdad went out of Baghdad, and it went all over the empire, vast empire, school of thought. In that empire, because of the struggle among some feuding parties, there was actually many school of thought. The Sufism versus scholar, personal and interior path of contemplation versus social moral life interpretation by law, orthodoxy versus the right practice. Shall we do the right practice, or shall we have the right belief? The Abbasides started to deteriorate. Again, the groups within Islam started to feud among each other. Part of the empire claimed independence from the Abbasides. In between that, you had the Crusades, it's actually a Western bias to think that the Crusades have done anything, although they were there a couple of hundred years. But the Crusades stayed within their own side. But for the most part, the Crusades came when the Arab Empire or the Muslim Empire was most vulnerable. And the fascinating thing about the Crusades coming towards Jerusalem, not only don't want to talk about the atrocities that was created, but what the Crusades took from Jerusalem. The Crusade would come, and they would see the goods and the services and the linens and the products in the Muslim world is second to none. It is not unusual, and I would like you to Google that to see the most revered painting of the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus from the Italian Renaissance, to see baby Jesus and Virgin Mary wrapped in silk made in Jerusalem. And if you look at the painting, you would see on the actual side of the painting, or on the actual side of the linen that Virgin Mary is wearing and baby Jesus is wearing, is Quranic calligraphy. Because when you want to look for a linen, or you look for clothing to wrap your saints with in Europe, you look no further than Jerusalem. So the Crusaders, not knowing Arabic, will pick up the best linen, which is silk from the Muslim world, and they would wrap their saints with it. And here comes the artist drawing the picture, and right there on baby Jesus and Virgin Mary, it says, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, which means there's only one God and Muhammad is his messenger. You know, it's really fascinating. I should have put that picture for you, but please, that's your homework for today. Go look at it. They, not only that, you know, the Crusaders took with them things like soap. You know, they discovered the delight of soap. They discovered the delight of swords. The best swords were made in Persia. The Crusades went to Europe with a tremendous amount of knowledge, tremendous amount of culture from the Muslim world. 1187, Salahuddin, by the way, Saladin is a Kurd. So Saladin's a Kurd. Recaptured Jerusalem, and he spared, just like Muhammad did in Mecca, he spared all the people. The Crusaders actually butchered everybody, Muslim, Christians, and even dark brown Christians and Jews, and they changed the worship places. There was only one religion only that is official, which is Christianity. When Saladin took over, he took over on Thursday. By Friday, the mosque returned to be a mosque. And the beautiful thing that Saladin have done, all the Christian artifacts that was inside the mosque, he packed it and sent it to church. So the church have their mass on Sunday. He's actually, if you read Saladin, a story, he was actually the most famous Muslim in the Christian world at that time. The Christianity and Islam, just a couple of notes here. You look at the history of Christianity and Islam, there are 3 points that Dr. Charles Kimball makes in his book. They're both evangelical. They both, the problem that they had, that they both are evangelical, number one. Number two, they both have, you know, after the spread of Christianity, no one challenged Christianity except for Islam. I mean, Judaism was not about to come and challenge the spread of Christianity. Hinduism or Buddhism was not. But the only empire that challenged the spread of Christianity was Islam. So they were both evangelical. They both used the same space. There was a geopolitical problem. And then the third one, which is the most problematic, is Jesus, right? They both have profound belief in Jesus. Profoundly similar, yet profoundly different. So Islam was moving, and the Crusades, in some instances, tried to stop it. There's the movements in Persia, in Egypt, the Fatimids. In Egypt, this is where Alexander the Great became an independent state. And it's really fascinating because Al-Azhar University, which is the most prestigious university in the world for people to get seminary, is in Egypt. It was added at that time. In addition to the threads, The Caliph now is just sitting on the throne like no other. Here's the major semi-united empire, the Ottoman Empire, from 1502 to 1722. I'm sorry, the Turkish Empire, which stayed all the way to our nowadays times. The Safavid Empire, which was Persian capital of Isfahan, is a Shia Islam. And the Mughal Empire, 1520 to 1857, India, the capital of Delhi, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. 13th century, the Abbasid Empire was fragmented. 1258, Baghdad was captured by the Mongols. The Mongols, man. This is called actually, in Islamic history, the catastrophe of Baghdad. The Mongols came into the Muslim world from Southeast Asia. They're the one who paved the road for the Turks, the Ottoman Turks. It was said that they would travel with 4 horses, right? And when they're hungry, they will slaughter the horses, drink the blood, and barbecue the horse, and so on and so forth. They were so brutal. But to make a long story short, the Mongols came to the Muslim world and realized what kind of a civilization it is. The Mongols ended up taking over and becoming Muslims par excellence. The Mongols took Islam to a whole new civilization and a whole new horizon. Within few years, they went from people who actually would pile, skulls of their victims to actually being people who burned the whole civilization of Islam, who would butcher everybody, to actually building huge mosques that would glorify God. And by all means, those of you who went to Turkey and saw the blue mosques and they see all this is their color, the bluish and the beautiful arts that they had. The Ottoman Empire with the Safavid Empire is moving, right? All these empires eventually fall, and the only thing that we have left is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire moves and take over the holy places. All of a sudden, Islamic cultures change. It's no longer in the hands of the minorities, the Arabs, who has 18 to 20% of the Muslim population. Now anybody could have the leadership. The Mongols had the leadership. Now the Turks have the leadership. And it's really fascinating that the Muslim world as we know it now is under expansion under Murad II from 14. This is the Muslim Empire expansion to 1682. It's a huge empire. It moved upwards. Constantinople, which is the capital, the last capital to fall, was taken, renamed Istanbul, and the 1453 fall of Constantinople, fulfillment of the prophecy. There was this prophecy that Constantinople will eventually will fall under the hands of the Muslims. 1600, the Ottoman had control all major cities and educational, culture, legal system. There was a collaboration between 3 empires. 1800s, decline of the Sultanates, rise of the Western Industrial Revolution. 1731, the Safavid fell, all these feuding dynasties. The Mughal fell. Only the Ottoman Empire that stayed until 1923. Here's the decline of the Ottoman Turks from 1300s to 30. You would see them declining, losing land, losing property, and the Ottomans now have nothing of this whole entire is what we have a new state. It's called Turkey. The reason it was called Turkey because of Ataturk, who actually took over the land. And it's really fascinating if you look at the history of Turkey. The history of Turkey is when Ataturk took over, he completely went from an Islamic empire to a secular state overnight. I mean, an extreme secular state overnight. Not only that, anything have to do with Arabic, anything have to do with Islamic civilization, he got rid of it. So imagine that you were using the Arabic letters, and overnight, he changed to the Roman letters. So the entire population became illiterate overnight. The turmoil that you see in Turkey, and it made a whole complete. Ataturk. It's been told in the history book that there was millions of scholars who actually stood up for Ataturk were put to death, were killed. For the most part, World War I, World War II, the Muslim world was colonized. It was this idea that the Muslim world is falling behind. And you would see from this chart here which country controlled which area. Actually, I'm from right here, Lebanon. Let me tell you how deep that thought was. I'm a refugee in Lebanon, but originally I'm from Palestine, known as Israel now. So right here, Israel, or Palestine, was under the United Kingdom. What language does the United Kingdom speak? English. So Lebanon, right, was under French. What language do French people speak? Not French fries? Okay, French. So because I'm a Palestinian refugee who lived in Lebanon, I had to speak English. I have to learn English. That was actually the institution. Any Palestinian who lived in Lebanon, although Lebanese people, the educational system is all French, but because I was under, or my family was under colonial power of the United Kingdom, so I have to speak English, which I don't speak it yet, I mean, I don't, for the most part. But I want you to take a look at this, because somebody asked me the question: who makes the decision? Where's, which cultural norms would you follow? Not only the Muslim world. I mean, United Kingdom, France, Italy, Spain. All these countries were in their different domain. This is what the Muslim world looked like as we speak. Colonial power came and divided this huge empire, which I took 25 minutes for you to understand where all this different culture and different civilization and so on and so forth are. And this is how the Muslim world looked like. There was a rise of Islamists, and there was a rise of revivalists. An entire country. Imagine those little bitty tiny countries, and we're gonna look at this very troubled area that we call the Levant, because that's where I grew up, and to show you what the colonial power have done and where's the culture of violence coming from. Okay, the Quran and the Sunnah have been the guide for the Muslim political and moral activities throughout the centuries. The example of how Prophet Muhammad and his companions led their lives and developed the first Muslim community to serve as a blueprint for Islamically guided and socially just state and society. It's been the law for centuries, right? For 13th century, even when we had different dynasties like the Umayyads and the Abbasids and the Ottomans and the Safavid, all those people have Islamic law. In these all other Sultanate states, Islam was the basis of the state: legal, political, educational, economical, and social institution. The Middle East, in the era of Prophet Muhammad and his successor, all Muslims belonged to a single community, right? The idea of a state countries was not even on the map. They were based upon an interconnection of religion and state, where faith and politics were inseparable in some areas, inseparable in different areas. By 11th century, the Islamic world was under attack by the Crusades, who were only in one region, the Turks and the Mongols, who turned to be Muslims. But the Crusade occupied a small area. The Turks and the Mongols became Muslim. The colonial power made it clear that Islam is backward and the Muslim world have to be changed. Because of that, they divided this into little bitty small countries. Muslims were politically subjugated by Europe Empire of Russia, Holland, Britain, and France, furthermore, in the 19th, 20th century. In the 20th century, marked two dominion themes, European colonialism and Muslim struggle for independence. After World War II, the French were in West and North of Africa, Lebanon, Syria, the British of Palestine, Iraq, Arabia, Gulf, and the Indian subcontinent, Malay and Brunei, and the Dutch of Indonesia, right? France and Algeria, right? The French power, the French colonial power, were very brutal in Algeria. So now when you turn the TV on, you see that there are problems in France. Algerians who actually moved to France moved as slaves, and they lived in ghettos. We were talking earlier about Muslims in the West, in the United States of America, compared to the Muslims in Europe. Most of the Muslims in Europe even went as blue-collar workers. Muslims in the West came to be educated. By the way, there's a 4.33 years worth of education per Muslim, 4.33. So many Muslims actually close to a master's degree. There's a huge amount of education. It's the most influenced community educationally. So there is that struggle between the Algerians who are now still living in ghettos in France, for instance. There's no justification for terror. There's no justification for what some of the Algerian Muslims or French Muslim Algerians who live in France would do, but there's this sensitivity between France and Algeria. It has been said there's 1.2 million Algerians were butchered on the hand of the French colonial power. Okay? Not only that, Palestine. So 1948, the State of Israel was established. An entire state replaced another state, yet creating now another turmoil for the Middle East. This is one of the statement that was made. The attitude can be seen in the statement of Lord Cromer, the British consul in Cairo from 1883 to 1907. He said, as a social system, Islam has been a complete failure. Islam keeps women in a position of inferiority. It permits slavery. It generates tendency, is intolerant towards other faith. Does that sound familiar? You know, I thought I was reading this and it was like, gee, this is what they're saying about us right now. Although, you know, for 13th century, you know, what the rights Islam has given women, 7th century, I know we deteriorated since then, is unbelievable. The wife of the Prophet to be an ordained Imam, so to speak, 7th century, to speak after his death, the right to vote, the right to be cared for, and so on. Islam has complete failure. Islam keeps women in position of inferiority. It permits slavery, which is really strange, right? 1883 to 1907. When did we start the slave trade? And although Islamically, Prophet Muhammad outlawed slavery 7th century and made it mandatory. As a matter of fact, Islamically, if you want to compensate for a sin, right? So the Quran says, if you committed a sin, here's what you should do to compensate for a sin. You could do A, B, or C, free a slave. So it became part of Islamic theology. If you want to compensate for your sin, is to actually, get rid of this system of slavery, and it generates tendency is intolerance towards other faith. Right. Neocolonialism, the absence of stable state led. What I'm trying to say this. That led to many to ask whether there is something about Islam that is anti-hierarchical of civil society and rule of law. The answer is this. This question lies more in the history of politics than the religion. Other Muslim states are only several decades old, right? Some of these countries got their independence. Lebanon got their independence 1962. Some African nation got their independence 1973. These countries were carved. Actually, they carved European powers to serve Western interests. I'm going to talk about Lebanon here in just a minute. The conflict that resulted from these actions have led to death of millions of communal warfare between Hindus and Muslims. Civil war between East and West Pakistan, and led to creation of Bangladesh. The conflict in Kashmir over India. The problems in Lebanon, Syria, and the conflict between Muslim and Jews over the creation of the state of Israel. The political and economical models were borrowed from Western to replace the Islamic political and economic system after independence from colonial rulers in the mid-20th century. The entire system, if I want to simplify what colonialism is to you, with all respect and love, is I would use the word institutional slavery. The whole system was enslaved with institutional power. Lack of freedom, unelected governments whose leader are kings, military, ex-military officers, and rules in majority of countries in the Muslim world. State power is heavily reliant on security forces, police, military. Many Muslim states operate within the culture of authoritarianism and opposing to the civil society of free will. Let me take you to the Levant here quickly. Here's what the colonial power did, right? Now, this is a huge nation. I'm going to concentrate on the Levant because this is where ISIS is right now, or ISIL, as President Obama called them. Islamic State, the ALIC stands for the Levant. The Levant is this region here, part of Turkey, Syria. But let me show you what happened here, how this is affecting the environment or the culture of terror. So when the colonial power divided these countries, right, it created the state of Jordan, right? Are you with me? So they created the state of Jordan, which there's no state called Jordan. And if there's Jordanian people here, they're going to get mad with me. But for the most part, here's what we do. We're going to create a state of Jordan. We make it a buffer zone, right? And let's make a state of Israel, which at that point, and put the Jews in power in 1948. It's a big war. But anyway, the Jews were a minority at one time. They're in power of Palestine. Let's go next door to Lebanon. The Christians are minority. But the Christians are in charge of Lebanon. Right? Are you with me? So the minorities were in power. Let's go to Syria. The Shia are a minority, or the Alawites, which is an offspring of Shia, but they're in power. Let's go to Iraq. The Sunnis are a minority, right? But they're in power. Can you understand how this creates? So right here, in the area of the Levant, you have, and right here, by the way, in Jordan, created a new state. Many of the Palestinians actually left to Lebanon and Jordan. So the people who actually were nomad people became in power, which actually are the nomad people of this country. And the vast majority of this country are Palestinian, but they're not in power. So the minorities in power in Lebanon, it is stated by the constitution that is drawn by the colonial power that only a Christian can be a president of the country. Hold on. Not any Christian. Maronite Christian. Maronite, part of the Catholic Church, right? And because you're a Muslim, you're not allowed to be a president. Is that problematic? Now, not only that, in the Constitution of Lebanon, you know how we have representation based on number of people, right? So in Lebanon, representation is based on religion. So the vice president have to be a Muslim, not any Muslim, Sunni Muslim. Because that's just, and then the Speaker of the House have to be Shia Muslim, and so on. I was looking. Some of you looking at me like, really? Yeah, look it up. When you put the minority in power, the Sunnis here are the majority in Syria, and part of Syria is also Kurd. By the way, it's a Muslim story. It could be a myth that when the colonial power came in, they decided to divide the Kurds into 8 different regions, simply because Saladin, who actually took over Jerusalem from the Crusaders, was a Kurd. So the Kurds are all over the place, right? You go to Damascus here, the Sunnis are the majority, but the people in power are Alawites. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, but the vast majority of Iraq is Shia. In Palestine, you take this whole area there with the sectarian violence, with everything that we've been looking at. It's a combination for disaster, complete disaster. I was just there. You know what I'm saying? My mom is Syrian, I told you. My father is Palestinian. I was born in Lebanon. I have family all over the place here because we're all refugees. But for the most part, it is really fascinating that the idea of simple citizenship is not there. Can you imagine that I tell you, hey, don't put gas? That's going to sound weird, right? Is there a gas station close by here? Don't put gas at that gas station because the person who owns that gas station is Christian, and you need to go put gas at the Muslim gas station. This is what we see sometimes. It's heartbreaking. The basic fundamentals of services, they're not there, and people are serving the interests of not the political, but the religious group of people. Is my joke there? In the West, I have all of the above, man. So I have all these cultures in my mosque, so to speak. I have the Pakistani, who's Muslim, right, who was part of India, that was part Muslim, and I have the Bangladeshis. So I have 3 countries that were divided under colonial power, right? And they're in my mosque. I have 72 ethnicities in my mosque. That's very average. In the United States, there are 2 big groups: African Americans, indigenous, which don't have time to talk about what the indigenous people went through 600 years of slavery here. And we have the immigrants and their American-born children. Can you see a mixture of people that have been through so many different cultures and background and misunderstanding and misinterpreting and being under colonial power and so on and so forth? There are many immigrants and their children, Hispanics, white Americans, average of 72 ethnicity. Sectarian differences are very minimized. Friday prayer in America is the most diverse hour on earth. But we speak English, because that's what the language everybody speaks. But for the most part, here's the 2 major groups. African Americans is the largest group, and you got Arabs, Asian, and India, Pakistan, Turks, Caucasian, and different ethnicities. This is the 2 major groups in North America. Islam in America traces its way for a long period of time. We spoke about this is a gentleman by the name of Elijah Poole in the early 60s. In the early 60s, he claimed to be a prophet. This man, can you see him here really quickly? This man, who's actually white or half white, claimed to be God in the flesh and summoned this person to be his last messenger. And which is really strange, because the theology of the Nation of Islam, with all respect to them, talks about, sorry, I'm outside my borders, talks about the black man being superior, but yet God in the flesh is white. But if you read the, with all respect, this is just history, scholastic knowledge, but if you read the reasoning that God somehow wanted to be accepted in North America in the 50s and the 60s, so he had to look, acceptable. So Malcolm X became one of the charismatic speakers, as we said, and then he went to Mecca and came back, and he actually became an Orthodox Muslim, a very practicing Muslim, died defending that Islam is colorblind. This is the current leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, in Chicago. There are white Muslims, so don't feel bad, you know. Actually, Muhammad Alexander Webb, he's the first man to represent Islam in North America. The word parliament in 1893, which is many of us in the West say, the first interfaith gathering in the world is 1893. No. There was a lot of interfaith gathering before 1893 because history started when man landed on earth, or man came from heaven to earth, not when we landed here in North America. So I only have to make that very understanding to a lot of people. So Alexander Webb, if you like to read, it's very fascinating. Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, who was actually an ambassador, look at him, right? He actually the first one to proclaim the call for prayers if you teach world religion, the word parliament in Chicago, he represented Islam. So the Muslim community is very diverse. I have no idea who those people are, but this guy is really creepy for the most part. I just wanted to show you the #1 scholar in North America, and he have the capacity, or he is known now. His name is Sohaib Webb or William Webb. By the way, no connection between this Webb and this Webb. This man actually is from Oklahoma City, and if you Google his name, he's actually the #1 scholar in North America. But here's what's interesting about this guy, right? I taught him a few things, but also he was the head of the Crips in Oklahoma City. How do you say it? Crips and Bloods. All right. Oh, wow. Is that how you make signs? Oh, man, I don't know. All right. So he converted to Islam. His story is known. He robbed a place. He happened to rob a Muslim place, and he came across some literature and ended up converting to Islam. Went to Egypt, studied. He speaks perfect Arabic, perfect English, and he's from Oklahoma. If you Google his name, you're probably going to find him. So don't worry, we do have white Muslims, right? That's a joke here, man. He's supposed to laugh, right? All right. In the African American world, you would see all kind of names, from Muhammad Ali, who just passed away, to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, to the two brothers who gave up $1 million contract each to go to pilgrimage. My favorite is Nazir Muhammad because he's from Oklahoma City, and I was sitting in the arena one time at the basketball game, and everybody in the basketball game, was cheering him, and everybody was saying, Muhammad. Oh my gosh, I was like, oh my God. He's like, but nevertheless, there are all kind of, there's some people we're not proud of, but nevertheless, the outlandish, the Chappelle Show, Muslim, probably Dr. Oz. How many of you are surprised that Dr. Oz is Muslim? Right? His name is Muhammad Oz. Right? She's drunk at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm sorry. Muhammad Ali, Clay, and so on. I want to, anybody knows who this person is? Gad Stevens, right? Gad Stevens. It was actually silly. He's trying to come to the United States, and they will not give him a visa, at one point. So what I'm trying, this is some of the artists we're going to listen to, right? I promise you country Muslim music, right? So we're going to listen to a couple of these artists here. To be politically and racially correct, we're going to do rap music and country music. So we're going to do this in a minute. So in the United States, I'll have all the 72 ethnicities, 72 cultures coming up. September 11th, I wrote my thesis on September 11th, and the constructive effects of September 11th. Part of that is a huge emphasis on developing more pure interpretation of Islam, free of foreign culture, right? Muslims came together. American Muslims are being encouraged to develop American Muslim art form in all artistic media, including music and comedy. Let me tell you something. You know how certain Christian denominations are not supposed to sing and dance? Muslims are not supposed to sing and dance either. But somehow we look the other way when the artistic form was bringing out the culture. And when you see those videos, you're going to understand how the new generation, I call them the kids, but how the new generation is coming up, trying to bring out this American Muslim culture that is emerged out of multiples. I mean, multiples of culture. There's this American culture that's coming together. Things have changed now. Actually, there's a huge effect of American culture on us. Some of the culture I want to share with you is marriage culture. There are more, we call them arranged marriages. It's not an Islamic thing to have an arranged marriages, although as a father, I would like to influence my daughter. Right? Change the word. Influence my daughter, because I would like, you know what I'm saying. But here's some stories from overseas that are creeping into America. Not too long ago, somebody wanted to get married. In certain cultures, without naming the culture, a girl can be forced in marriage. Her father tells her, you're marrying that guy, and that's it. Right? And it's really strange because that's not an Islamic thing. Actually, if any father Islamically forced his daughter to get married, the marriage is null and void Islamically. So I'm going to this city to do this wedding for this young lady. And the culture is the father speaks on behalf of his daughter, period. Which Islamically, when Islam went into Pakistan, it allowed for that culture to happen. However, yes, you could have your father speak on your behalf. However, you must, in front of the Imam, and in front of two witnesses, give permission to your father to marry you off. Islamically, they looked at it like, because marriage in Islam is like a contract, kind of like prenuptial agreement. So a girl might shy away from asking for her rights or for whatever she wants. So maybe it allowed for her father to speak on her behalf. However, she have to actually tell me in front of two witnesses that she allow her father to speak on her behalf. So I walk in this house, and I could feel something is wrong, right? Because, dudes and dudettes, when you're getting married, you should be happy. So I look at the guy, somebody's nervous, he said, I'm the father of the bride, I'm going to speak on her behalf. Oh, great, awesome. I need to see her, that's what Islamic law is, and two witnesses and so on. Actually, since I'm going to be allowed to do the civil marriage, I'd rather her speak. This is what 99% of marriages, the girl must speak. And the father will not allow me. Well, if you don't allow me, then I can't do that. Then he said, just a second. He leaves and come back, and he leaves and come back. And I walk in the room, eventually allows me. I said, are you allowing your father to speak on your behalf? And the girls looked at me, looked at her mom, looked at her dad, turned around, put her head down. I asked her again. Asked her for the third time. She was starting to cry. I said, okay, two things we could do that. I could dial 911. That family don't like me. Or this girl's going with me, right? I took that girl with me, as a matter of fact. And, she's happily married with 4 children now. But nevertheless, some of these cultures that have nothing to do with Islamic basics law are creeping in. Modern voice is now loud, majority replacing narrow-minded, strict influence. More commitment, local politics, and social causes compared to earlier focus on home. We used to focus on what happened in Pakistan, in India, and Lebanon, but now there's more focusing on, the local politics. Because, for somehow, Islam and Muslim is the issue in local politics now. From focusing on home rather than overseas. Let's finish looking at some artistic things, if you don't mind, and see some of the American culture, some of the indigenous. I'm going to do actually some of the immigrants, which is the country music first, and then look what some of the people are laughing now. You're gonna like it. Are you ready? All ready? Say, I am ready. All right. Oh my gosh. Is the audio on?
I'm telling you, you move him around the ring, he'll be tired by the second round.
Well, what if he's not?
He will be.
You really think I'm good enough to beat Jake?
Man, I don't know. Maybe.
Think I'm good enough to beat you?
You're definitely good enough to beat Jake.
I see him making those faces, trying his best to break my nerve. But I'm calm in the face of anger, and I don't reply to the ugly words. If they ask me why I'm silent, they say in this world you gotta take respect. I say, gentlemen, I'm like incense. The more you burn me, the more I'm fragrant. We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I fight for what's right. Let's go a little higher, cause I was born, you see, and I was raised to be. I lace the lines of these times with generous peace. There's a thin line between virtue and fear, though they look alike. Both demand restraint, and it's enough that I know where I stand in line. I'm not scared of you, I'm scared of me, and I live by controlling my fool. Cause you're a fool enough for the both of us, but I still try to find the good in you. We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I fight for what's right. Let's go a little higher, cause I was born, you see, and I was raised to be. I lace the lines of these times with generous peace. I know it's hard to listen to the words you just can't stand. Gonna take more than a fist to enlighten an ignorant man. Don't you see how we fear the patient eyes of a lion? Don't you see how we feel those lions in their silence? We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I fight for what's right. Let's go a little higher. We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I'm gonna fight for what's right. We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I fight for what's right. Let's go a little higher, cause I was born, you see, and I was raised to be. I lace the lines of these times with generous. We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I fight for what's right. Let's go a little higher. We can fight, but we don't need to fight tonight. Yeah, we'll put out the fire. If I'm gonna fight, then I'm gonna fight for what's right.
You could check him out. He have many videos online. He's in the Middle East. He's actually a sensation in the Middle East. He's from Ponca City, Oklahoma, believe it or not. His father is immigrant. He was a Conoco executive, and his mother is all American, Ponca City, and That's his interest. Okay, let's look at also one more video, one more from the indigenous culture. Another 3 minutes, and we open it for Q&A. Oh, religious dates. I don't know who put that up there.
I am not afraid to stand alone. I am not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, I am not afraid to stand alone. Everything will be alright. I am not afraid to stand alone. Gonna keep my head up high. I'm not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, everything will be alright. Gonna keep my head up high. Single mother raising her children, and now she's a Muslim. Started praying and wearing a headscarf. It was a healing for her heart, struggling with no one to lean on. But with prayer she would be strong. Had a job and then she was laid off. Got a better education and it paid off. She was called for a job that she dreamed of. Close by, great pay, she was in love. They brought her in, told her she's the #1 pick. You got the job, but you gotta lose the outfit. It's a tough position that you put me in, cause I've been struggling with my 2 children. But I continue looking for a job again. My faith and my religion I will never bend. I am not afraid to stand alone. I am not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, I am not afraid to stand alone. Everything will be alright. I am not afraid to stand alone. Gonna keep my head up high. I'm not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, everything will be alright. Gonna keep my head up high. Not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, everything will be alright. Gonna keep my head up high. Peer pressure, they were insisting, and I was resisting. Some days I felt I was giving, just wanted to fit in. I know when I'm praying and fasting, they be teasing and laughing. So I call on my Lord for the power, for the strength every day, every hour. One day there's a new Muslim teacher, single mom and the people respect her. Just seeing the strength I get stronger. They can break my will no longer. You don't see me sweating when they jones cracking. Never see me cursing with my pants sagging. I ain't never running, yo, I'm still standing. I'm proud with the Lord to the very end. I am not afraid to stand alone. I am not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, I am not afraid to stand alone. Everything will be alright. I am not afraid to stand alone. Gonna keep my head up high. I'm not afraid to stand alone. If Allah's by my side, everything will be alright. Gonna keep my head up high. I'm a tough one who can bear their blows. The rest play dumb, they don't dare say no. Scared of being shunned by the peers they know, but I ain't gonna run, I ain't scared no more. These sisters be resolute, never stress when the rest say they buzzing cute. And they get the respect of the other youth. Comes best with the dress, you know that's the truth. These sisters are strong, gotta hand it down. So me, I'm a brother, gotta stand my ground. I ain't gonna shudder when the gang's around. Peer pressure, whatever, it's my planet now. Others may fall, I'ma hold my own. With the help of Allah, I'll be strong as stone. And I'ma be brave, let Islam be shown. Cause you know I ain't afraid to stand alone.
It all comes down to this. With just 5 seconds remaining, the Raiders trail 21-17. Their only hope, Tariq Muhammad back for the kickoff.
I am not afraid to stand alone. I am not afraid to
Okay. Sorry, I ran over time. Just a little bit over time. Again, off the subject, on the subject, whatever question you're asking, probably everybody wants to know. So, whatever question, please. Am I that scary that people scared to ask questions? No? Okay. Right. Okay. I could hear you. I could repeat what you say. Okay, thank you. So I was the other day at Walmart standing getting some medicine for my mother-in-law, and this lady looked at me and she said, "Did you have head surgery?" I can't make that up. I was like, "No, ma'am, I'm an imam." So what is that? So I have to use the word Muslim, and the conversation went the opposite way after that. So do you remember the story of Moses in the Bible, in his presence? We're going to talk about Moses next, in the burning bush. That God told him to take his shoes off and cover his head. He's in a holy valley. So rabbis still cover their heads and take their shoes off. And we still do the same thing. Respect for God Almighty, thinking that God Almighty is always above us. That's where the context of the Bible and the Quran comes from. However, Islamically, culturally, people in North America wear it for different reasons. I wear it to strike a conversation. Although, to be quite honest with you, when I fly back tomorrow night, I not wear that on the airplane, because there are too many Muslims been removed from the airplane. It used to strike a conversation. Unfortunately, nowadays it doesn't. Muslims from Turkey would wear that as an indication that they have been to Mecca. African American Muslims in this country would wear it to indicate that they have gone back to their ancestor religion, which is Islam. I wear it just because I'm Imam, and my wife always tells me before I start becoming Imam, she said, when you wear your suit and everything, nobody knows that you're Muslim, but Muslim women, because of their distinguished look with their headscarf, we're always targeted. I said, you know what, as a solidarity with you, and since I have no hair whatsoever, I'll just wear it anyway. Yes, I could hear you. I think we all could hear him. Go ahead. I tell you, all of the above except Muslim culture in general. All of the above you just mentioned, because for 13 centuries, Islam have done prosperously well. The surplus, if you look economically at many of those countries, even when there were within feuding dynasties, surpluses, you would read in Eastern books that nations have a surplus of money. To the point that if somebody wants to get married, the state will buy you a house and a land, and find you a wife and so on. Islam, the declining that we're seeing right now, some of these countries are 30 years old, 35 years old. An entire wealth of nation, or entire a nation that was over 3-4 continents now are. Lebanon is 3.5 million people. That's an entire country, with more than 12 rivers, so it's rich in water. Jordan next door has no water whatsoever. Lebanon, that's not our subject, but you have 3.5 million people, and now 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Right? Imagine half your population. You added half your population overnight. The situation is unbearable. failed policies, undemocratic countries, colonial power who divided the people, sectarian violence, all of the things that you just mentioned are a recipe for some of the failures. On the other side, you have Gulf countries who have a tremendous amount of oil. They're doing prosperously well. Many of those countries in the Middle East, like Syrians and Algerians, go to these countries for work, and they find huge amount of salary difference. A lot of people from Lebanon, 3.5 million people live in Lebanon, but there's about 8 million Lebanese. They are all over the place working to provide for their families. So there's the geopolitics, the regional politics, the lack of democracy, lack of transparency, the lack of trust in the institutions and financial institutions in particular creates all of the above. Yes.
We don't pick you up on the recording if you don't go to the mic.
Oh. Okay.
My question is about the 5 prayers that you do on a daily basis. Are they different from one another throughout the day? Is there a prescribed way to do them? Or are they free form? Or
yeah, thank you
please
so
tell me
much.
about that.
So Muslims are mandated to pray 5 prayers. There's a beautiful story that involved Moses and Muhammad in the next slide, so stay tuned. But the 5 daily prayers go with the sun. So pre-dawn prayer, which is awesome. I wake up early in the morning, then I go to the gym and I pray. So I get to do both of them. And noon prayer, afternoon prayer, sunset prayer, and night prayer. As if throughout the cycle of the sun, you remember God Almighty. What's his name? The actor Willis Smith. Is it Smith? Yeah, he was recently in India, and he said I'm not a Muslim, but there's something beautiful about being reminded of your Lord 5 times a day. Even in the Methodist tradition, Bishop Hayes, who was a good friend of mine in Oklahoma City, he said we want to constitute more prayers in the Methodist Church. He said there's that connection. It is really, for those of you who went to the Middle East, you'll be going to your daily life and so on. All of a sudden you hear this loud speakers. In North America, they don't allow us because, our neighbors don't have good sense of humor for the most part, for 6 o'clock in the morning. But all of a sudden, people stop and remember the Creator and remember their Maker. The 5 daily prayers are very similar as far as what we recite. We recite the opening chapter of the Quran, very similar to the Lord's Prayer. Very similar to the Lord's prayers. And to keep the Quran vivid in our memory, we also recite part of the Quran. So there are quite a few, 11% of the Muslim population, that's a lot, have memorized the entire Quran. Most of those people are in India and Pakistan. Those are non-Arabic speaking people, right? But enough people have memorized enough scripture to keep the prayers going. Even when I preach in the mosque on Friday, I don't say, I have to have a reference from the Quran. So I would be, some people who come visit to the mosque said, well, the mosque is weird because you'll be saying, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, لا تغضب إن الله لا يحب. What are you saying, So I have to say the actual statement in Arabic and translate into English. Now, when we say prayer, those are prescribed prayers. We call them the formal prayers. Could be prayed anywhere, it could be prayed in the office and so on and so forth. The only prayer that prescribed to be prayed in the mosque is Friday prayer. So Friday prayer by, when we say noon, and noon is different from summer to winter. So just depending on the time, between 1 and 2 o'clock, people go to the mosque, listen to a sermon, and do actually the prayer. The formal prayers include kneeling and prostration. Muslims believe the fetus position that you're in when you're prostrating, you're the closest to God Almighty. Shows humility and humbleness to God Almighty. Now, there's other prayers like supplications, that you do, like grace before you eat. We have prayers for prayers. Trust me, we have prayers for everything. But the 5 daily prayers are prescribed daily, and there's also allowance, like I'm traveling, right? So I could combine my prayers. During cold weather, whatever, you don't have to go to the mosque. And so there's some allowances for prayers. But it is one thing that God Almighty have spoke of in the night journey when the Prophet went from night journey. Muslims believe that the Prophet was taken from Mecca to in the presence of God, and God prescribed the prayers himself. So he did not send Gabriel. So it's a huge emphasis on the prayers in the Quran. You bet.
In your first lecture, you listed a number of misconceptions that we have about Islam. What is the source or sources of those misconceptions?
Well, it just depends how much you want to go backward. If you read some of the books or some of the speeches during the Crusades, you would see exactly the same statements being made, that Islam is intolerance, that Islam is backward, that Islam mistreat women. And it's just really fascinating. These statements are being said over and over and over. In my opinion, there are many factors for the misconceptions. The political factor for some people to keep Islam away. That is not part of the Judeo-Christian roots. Islam has nothing to do with it. There is this notion that, maybe the notion that Ishmael was not well thought of biblically, just because the Bible was written from the one side of the story, one side of the family, like me and you sharing the same father, and I'm in charge of writing the story. Somehow, you left out just a little bit. We could look at the political atmosphere right now, the politics of fear. And the more I could make you fear of the other, the more you're going to vote for me, because I'm going to be your savior. Everybody's scared of Sharia law. We're going to talk about Sharia law in a minute. Nobody knows what it is, but it's out there to get us. You know what I'm saying? And it's just fascinating to see this now, the hate being spewed out of politician mouth about Islam, that's creating an atmosphere of hate and so on. All these misconceptions could be, those, it's fascinating sometimes. It's no problem when you see politicians and so on and so forth talking about this. It's problematic when elected officials that we elect to represent us, the people, would pinpoint on minorities or pick on minorities. But what really bothers me is when these kind of misconceptions are preached from the pulpit. It really bothers me. In my opinion, any imam, and I heard many hate speeches in the Middle East, anti-Christian hate speeches in the Middle East. But since I grew up in Catholic schools, I dismiss all that. But as any imam, any preacher, whatever title that person did, if he is a person that's spilling hate out there on the pulpit, that he or she have nothing to give to his congregation except, I don't have to put you down, to make myself look higher. It seems like there are certain congregations that's as if there is no more love or no more. There's no more love in the Bible. So all they do is miss. The affidavit of the guy that shot the two imams in Queens. He hears certain things in his church. He watches a certain outlet, news outlet, and then the Muslims moved in his neighborhood. So his only way of, showing that he's very patriotic is he went and shot two imams in Queens, New York. So all of these factors are there, and the simple fact, I don't like talking about the media in general because I always say the media. The simple fact that if it bleeds, it reads. The bad news is out there, and bad news sells and brings viewers and brings hits. And unfortunately, there are people being harmed with that.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Ooh. Imam.
Oh, I didn't know we have a. Oh, so we're leaving the people of the left. We're going to the people of the right.
No, this is the left.
Oh,
over
this
here,
is. Oh, it
okay?
just depends how you look at it. It just depends how you look at it. Okay, all right.
It all depends on you look at it. Given the vast cultural differences that Islam is practiced in, is it a sin to read the Quran in the vernacular of that particular culture?
It is not. As a matter of fact, next lecture we talk about the vast interpretation of the Quran. The Quran calls itself Fussilat in Arabic. That's why I decided to go back overseas and study the Quran and everything in Arabic. So Fussilat is a word that describes the Quran. Fussilat means comprehensive, and also Fussilat means custom made, right? So the Quran refers to itself as if the Quran is a custom made, tailored suit just for me in the West. And it's a custom made, tailored suit for somebody who lives in Bosnia, or custom made. So there are those fixed things in the Quran, such as prayers and fasting. Those are no more than 3 to 5% of Islamic law. 95% of Islamic law changed according to region, according to what year it is, and according what generation it is. So it's not a sin to read the Quran in a cultural norms, not whatsoever. It was designed for that reason.
One quick question.
Yes, sir.
We're probably in an unparalleled refugee crisis since World War II in the Middle East.
You're going to make me cry now.
Tens of thousands of people are being displaced. They're going to Turkey. They're trying to get to Germany. They're trying to get to England. And yet the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, don't seem to have any room for their fellow Muslims. Why is that?
It's a strictly political, the answer is very political. The monarchies in some Gulf countries are very shaken. I mean, right now, as we speak, I don't know how long it's going to take before these kind of revolutions going to reach the Gulf. But bringing more refugees to these areas, and they're very wealthy, they're extremely wealthy. Bringing more refugees to that areas, depending on the situation. Because what my personal experience with the politics of the Middle East is what I call a political soccer, right? So everybody speaks for the rights of the Palestinians, yet as a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, I can't work, right? I don't have the basic rights to work in Lebanon or to become, if I work in Lebanon, my brother is still a refugee, by the way, in Lebanon. I'm a U.S. citizen, but my brother, if he has to work, right, he has to work within the Palestinian camps, right, which create an atmosphere and a culture of despair and not self-worth and not belonging to that place. Islamically, of course, we believe that we are one nation, that there's a brotherhood and sisterhood and so on and so forth. It's heartbreaking. It's almost hypocritical when some of the Gulf nations say, well, Germany should take more refugees. Shut up. Oh, sorry. Am I being recorded? You take some refugees. They're really worried about their longevity on that seat. And Syrians, refugees coming in there, would agitate that even further. Some countries are 100% pro-regime, and the regime in Syria do not want the refugees. For instance, in Turkey, the refugees are well taken care of. In Jordan, the refugees are okay. In Lebanon, the refugees, I don't want to start crying, but I could tell you stories, because the government is a pro-Syrian regime, and which, politics aside, you still have a crisis. You still have 1.5 million people within your borders. So they're not well taken care of. You know, with my own eyes, I've seen a mother, you know, throw her kids. You know, Lebanon is like you have Syria on this side and Lebanon on this side, mountains. I've seen a mother throw her kids on the other side, you know, and the kid, you know, got stuck in the bushes, and you know, there was only one crazy, you know, American Superman who could go pick her up, and that was me. You know, I went picked her up, and I don't know what happened to the mother. So there's that feeling of despair, but depending on the politics of that country as it relates to Syria, is how the Syrian refugees are being treated. They're living in good condition in Turkey. In Lebanon, they're still intense. They're still intense. It rains inside. They have 2-3 bathrooms for 250 families. Some kids who were born in the refugee camp can't read or write, not even their own native tongue. Some of those kids are born in the refugee camp. I've been going back there since 2010, and some of those refugees now, some of them, you know, are 4 and 5 years old. They don't even know their name because their father and the mother were killed, and you know, we just give them name, and they have a piece of paper saying, you know, you're a refugee in Lebanon. So the situation is very difficult, and is very hypocritical of some of the rich nations, Muslim nation, that will not take some of their brethren in. Yes. So if we have somebody pass the microphone, it probably would be, can they catch it, or, yeah?
So the Quran specifies the rights of women, but why do some cultures suppress those rights and some, the others, don't?
Yes, the Quran specifies women's right. You know, as early as 6th century. The magic word you just mentioned is cultural norms. It is really fascinating to me that in some Muslim countries, Muslim women are not even allowed to go to the mosque. I mean, they're not allowed to the mosque. You ask them why, they have no reasoning behind it, right? In some countries, now we hear, now in Saudi Arabia, for instance, women cannot drive. It's changing, the thing is changing, but the simple fact is they might rely on some passages that was relevant at one point, because as we said, religion and the interpretation of religion is depending on, for instance, give you an example, make it very, very, very simple. So the Prophet did say women cannot ride alone. She must have a male companion. That's a statement of the Prophet. But take it back to 7th century Arabia, the word ride doesn't mean an airplane or a car, it means being on a camel or a horse. And going from point A to point B with robbers and thugs all over the place, right? What the Prophet meant is they should have a male companion, somebody who guards her and takes care of her. So when you look at the literal interpretation, and when the capital was in Medina, and moved to Damascus and moved to different places, Muslims' horizons were opened. The interpretation of law was completely changed. But in these places, they took that wording literally. And, you know, for that reason, it is really fascinating to me is if somebody would fly straight from this city to another city, you know, why would she need a male companion? But that's only in Saudi Arabia. And for the most part, some of the examples that are given to us, right, are from places, you know, people in Saudi Arabia do this. Well, the Arab world altogether is 18%. Let's look at Indonesia or Malaysia or Turkey, where Muslim women are head of state. Now Muslim women in Saudi Arabia just started serving in municipalities, by the way. But it's a move. They moved forward. Cultural norms and cultural interpretation, literal interpretation, some of those people would take their validation from this interpretation. Yes, ma'am.
2 questions. The first one is about prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Do women and men both do the 5 prayers and the prostrating themselves? And secondly, about the refugee camps. In your opinion, how may we best help to resolve this situation and make it better?
Thank you very much. So yes, men and women are both obliged per Islamic law to pray 5 times a day. In the mosque, there places for men and women, so they both pray 5 times a day. I pray with my wife and my kids. Every time I'm at home, since I'm an imam, I'm not much at home. You probably noticed that. But every chance I have, it's a beautiful feeling for myself and my wife to stand next to me and my children. We pray together and we reflect on the day together. That's how we start our day and that's how we end our day. In between, everybody's at work. You know, I wish I have a magic answer for how to help the Syrian refugees. I do what I can do in my part. You know, I volunteer when I go overseas. I raise money, volunteer, raise money for different charities. I think that's the only thing we could do. The third one is vote. Please. This election is gonna, you know, they're scaring us. The most famous heart surgeon in the United States and in the world is Dr. Nazih Zudi, who was a Syrian refugee. Baptist Medical Center in Oklahoma City. He's actually the one who operated on, I believe, Gorbachev's heart. You know, he was a Syrian refugee. And he has a heart transplant named after him. Our diversity, what people seem to forget, that unless you belong to my in-laws tribe or my wife's tribes, we're all refugees here, right? Maybe some of us came different generation, but we're all refugees here. But it's really gonna matter who we put in office, not only in the highest office, but in local offices and so on. You know, our country is now divided. It seems like the politics of fear now is out there. They want us to be scared of one another. They want us to be suspicious of one another. They want us suspicious of one another. They want us to, they want to disunite us. But I think voting and putting the right people to make the right decision for our nation will make us better people.